Echo 7.
The dog came home at 6:23. The woman who had walked him out the door 38 minutes earlier did not. Its leash was still clipped to his collar, the free end dragged along the concrete behind him. He scratched at the front door of a 2-story craftsman house in a gated subdivision in Castle Pines, Colorado. He whined. He backed up into the driveway, turned once in a tight circle, and lay down on the concrete with his chin on his paws and his eyes fixed on the door he could not open. A golden retriever named Buddy, 7 years old, healthy, uninjured. His breathing was rapid. His tongue was out. His fur, along the shoulders and flanks, was standing up in the raised pattern a veterinarian would later describe in her notes as pilomotor erection, the clinical term for the involuntary response the body produces when the sympathetic nervous system has been triggered at an extreme level. The dog had been away from the house for 35 minutes. The dog had walked back alone. The dog would never again cross the corner of Pinehurst Drive and Sapphire Point Parkway, which was the intersection he had just come from. The woman on the other end of that leash, a 58-year-old physical therapist named Miriam Thacker, was not behind him. She was not at the intersection. She was not anywhere a search would find her. This is Echo 7. Before I walk through the cases, I owe you an explanation of how this investigation came together and what it is based on. In October of 2022, a veterinary researcher at the University of Wisconsin-Madison named Susan Hadley contacted me after reading my earlier work on surveillance pattern anomalies. She had been building a database. The database consisted of canine stress hormone profiles, specifically cortisol, the primary stress hormone in mammals, drawn from blood tests performed on dogs that had returned alone from morning walks during which their owners had gone missing. Dr. Hadley had collected 17 such cases over the course of 4 years of her private practice, referred to her by veterinarians across the country who had noticed a specific pattern and had not known what to do with it. Of her 17, 12 met the criteria for what this investigation examines. The other 5 were excluded for reasons I will describe later. The 12 she shared with me, along with the cortisol data, the original veterinary records, and her contact notes with each of the surviving family members, formed the foundation of the work you are about to hear. What follows also draws from incident reports filed with 12 county sheriff's offices and 4 municipal police departments, public records obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests, interviews with surviving family members, and in 3 cases with the veterinarians who treated the returning dogs, and the analysis of 3 independent canine behavioral specialists who reviewed the case files anonymously. Some names in this investigation have been altered at the request of surviving family members and in consideration of open case status. Where a name has been changed, the first name kept within it is close to the original. The locations, the specific neighborhoods, the times of mourning, the breeds of dog, the cortisol measurements, and the behavioral observations of the returned dogs are unchanged. The families reviewed the drafts of their sections before publication and approved the details included. 12 people have disappeared while walking their dogs in residential American neighborhoods between sunrise and 7 in the morning, across 12 states, over an 11-year span between 2013 and 2023. In every case, the dog returned home alone. In every case, the dog returned within 40 minutes of the owner's expected return time. In every case, the dog was unharmed externally. In every case, the owner was never found. In every case, the dog's subsequent behavior changed in ways that veterinarians and family members described as phobic and enduring. The dogs refused to return to the walk route. The dogs refused to leave the house at the hour of the previous walk. 2 of the 12 dogs died of cardiac events within 18 months of the disappearance, despite being healthy at the time of the event. And in every one of the 12 cases, the blood panel performed on the dog within 72 hours of its return showed the same thing. I want to describe what that is before the cases, because it will appear in every case file, and you should understand what you are looking at. Cortisol is the primary stress hormone in mammals. In a healthy adult dog, the resting serum cortisol level ranges from roughly 1 to 6 micrograms per deciliter, depending on the time of day, the breed, and the individual. After a stressful event, cortisol rises sharply and returns to baseline over the course of 12 to 24 hours. A dog that has been in a fight, or has been chased by a predator, or has been in a car accident will show elevated cortisol on a blood panel for a day, maybe 2. In rare extreme cases, 3. In the 12 dogs in this investigation, the cortisol levels at the time of the first panel, drawn within 72 hours of the dog's return, were between 8 and 10 times the upper end of the normal range. Some of the dogs showed cortisol at 50 micrograms per deciliter or higher, which is a level more commonly seen in dogs that have been subjected to prolonged hospital or kennel confinement, not in dogs that have been outside for under an hour on a morning walk. The cortisol levels did not return to baseline over the expected 12 to 24-hour period. The levels remained elevated for between 3 and 7 days, declining slowly, in a curve that Dr. Hadley described to me as pharmacologically consistent with the response pattern of an animal that had been exposed to a sustained severe stressor lasting hours, not minutes. The dogs had been away from home for between 15 and 40 minutes. The hormone signature suggested exposure to an hours-long extreme event. Dr. Hadley sent the 12 profiles to 3 colleagues at other veterinary research institutions for independent review. None of the reviewing specialists could propose a known canine experience that would produce the observed hormone curve in the observed time frame. The dogs did not have injuries consistent with predator attack, which would produce both the cortisol spike and physical signs. The dogs did not have evidence of prolonged pursuit or exhaustion, which would produce a different hormonal mix, including elevated lactate and catecholamines. The dogs showed only the cortisol anomaly, combined with the sustained behavioral changes, combined with the uninjured return. That is the thread. That is what connects the 12 cases. A physiological signature in the blood of the returning dogs that no veterinary specialist has been able to reconcile with what the dogs experienced in under an hour on a suburban morning walk. Dr. Hadley will not speculate about the source. She said in our first phone conversation that her job is to document what the blood shows. What the blood shows is that whatever happened to the 12 owners happened in the presence of their dogs, and the dogs' bodies recorded it, and are still recording it, years later, in the form of refused walks and avoided intersections, and in 2 cases in the form of premature death. There is one additional physical anomaly I want to describe, because it surfaced only after Dr. Hadley and I cross-referenced veterinary records against the case files, and because once I knew to look for it, I could not unsee it. 8 of the 12 dogs in this investigation had been implanted with standard subcutaneous identification microchips by the breeders or rescues they came from. The chip is a passive radio frequency device, roughly the size of a grain of rice, injected between the shoulder blades. It transmits a unique identification number when passed over by a handheld scanner. It has no internal power source. It cannot fail under ordinary conditions. The chip manufacturer's specifications rate the devices for a service life in excess of 25 years. I have seen, in the veterinary records of the 8 chipped dogs, the post-event scan results. In 7 of the 8, the chip registered as normal when scanned by the attending veterinarian. In 1 of the 8, Rosie, Walter Ashford's black Labrador retriever, the chip did not register at all. The veterinarian rescanned. Nothing. The veterinarian called the chip manufacturer, a company based in Ohio, and was informed that a silent failure of a properly implanted chip was, in the company's records, statistically close to impossible. The company had documented exactly 4 such failures across approximately 2.3 million implanted devices over a 15-year production history. The company requested the chip. They asked for the dog to be brought in for a minor extraction procedure, which Michael Ashford consented to. The chip was removed. It was shipped to the manufacturer's diagnostic lab. The lab's report, which I have seen in a redacted copy Michael shared, states that the chip's internal components showed no physical damage, no corrosion, no manufacturing defect, and no identifiable cause for its failure to respond to the scanner. The report concludes with a single sentence: "The device is not consistent with any failure mode the manufacturer has previously documented." That report sits in the case file of a 71-year-old retired mathematics teacher who did not come back from a walk on a dirt road in Kentucky. His dog's silent chip is the only piece of physical evidence in the investigation that can be held in a hand. I have asked myself many times what kind of event renders a passive radio frequency device inert without leaving any mark on its housing. I have not come up with an answer. I want to tell you about Miriam first, because her case is the one Dr. Hadley called me about. Miriam Thacker was a licensed physical therapist who had spent 31 years working with stroke rehabilitation patients at Sky Ridge Medical Center in Lone Tree, Colorado. She lived with her husband Paul in the Castle Pines subdivision, a gated community of large homes built in the late 1990s on the foothills of the Front Range. Their children were grown and lived out of state. Miriam had adopted Buddy, a golden retriever, from a Denver area shelter 8 years before her disappearance. He was the second golden retriever she had owned. Her first had lived to age 13, and she had buried him in the backyard under a flat stone that Paul had engraved with the dog's name. Miriam had, according to Paul's statement to the Douglas County Sheriff's Office, viewed Buddy as something close to her third child. Every morning at 5:45, Miriam and Buddy left the house for a 30-minute walk. The route was consistent: down the driveway, right on Pinehurst Drive, left on Saddleback Ridge, straight across Sapphire Point Parkway, a half-mile loop through the community's central greenbelt, back across Sapphire Point, right on Saddleback, left on Pinehurst, home by 6:15, 30 minutes, 2.3 miles. Paul knew the route because he had walked it with her on weekends for years. Miriam liked the walk because the sun rose over the Front Range during that half hour in the fall, and she found it restorative. She had been doing the same walk for 11 years by September of 2021. On Tuesday, September 14th, she left the house at 5:44 in the morning. Paul was still in bed. He heard her leave. He heard the garage door open and close. He heard Buddy's nails clicking on the concrete driveway. He fell back asleep. Paul's alarm was set for 6:15, which was the time Miriam would normally walk back in, and which was when Paul liked to wake up to the sound of her pouring coffee downstairs. The alarm went off. Paul did not hear Miriam in the kitchen. He assumed she was running a few minutes late. At 6:30, he went downstairs. Miriam was not there. Buddy was not there. The coffee maker had not been touched. Paul walked to the front door and opened it to look down the street. He saw Buddy in the driveway, lying on the concrete with the leash trailing behind him. He did not see Miriam. Paul's statement to the deputy who arrived 40 minutes later described what he did next. He called Miriam's cell phone. It rang 6 times and went to voicemail. He walked outside and called her name. He walked down the driveway to Pinehurst Drive and looked in both directions. He saw no one. The subdivision at 6:30 on a Tuesday morning was quiet. The neighbors who walked their own dogs at similar times had not yet come out. Paul walked back to Buddy. The dog did not stand. Paul crouched down and picked up the nylon. It still ran from the dog's collar, clipped in the normal position, undamaged. The other end, the handle loop, was not torn or cut. It had simply been let go. Paul examined Buddy for injuries. He found none. The dog was trembling. Paul carried Buddy into the house. He called the Douglas County Sheriff's Office at 6:41. The sheriff's response was thorough. 2 deputies arrived within 15 minutes. They walked the route Miriam would have taken with Buddy. They walked it in both directions. They interviewed the one neighbor who had been awake at the time, a retired banker named Howard who had been drinking coffee on his back deck, and who reported that he had heard no screaming, no sounds of struggle, no vehicles, no anything unusual. They pulled footage from the subdivision's entrance gate cameras, which had recorded every vehicle entering and leaving the community between 4 in the morning and 7. The footage showed 14 vehicles. Every one of them was traced to a resident or to a known service provider. No unknown vehicle entered the subdivision during the relevant interval. No vehicle left the subdivision carrying any person or any object matching Miriam or her personal effects. A tracking dog from the Douglas County Sheriff's Office K9 unit was brought in at approximately 10 in the morning. The handler walked the dog to the foyer of the Thacker home and presented the dog with one of Miriam's sneakers to establish the scent. The dog locked on. The handler led the dog out the front door and down the driveway. The dog took the scent trail to the end of the driveway, turned right onto Pinehurst, walked approximately 240 yards, and stopped at the corner of Pinehurst and Sapphire Point Parkway. The dog circled. The dog sniffed the asphalt in a concentrated pattern. The dog did not continue. The dog whined, sat down, and refused to proceed in any direction. The handler, who had worked K9 tracking for 12 years and had not seen this specific behavior before, walked the dog to 3 different streets radiating from the intersection and attempted to re-establish the scent. The dog did not lock on again. The handler noted in his report that the dog's posture at the intersection, before its refusal, was consistent with alarm rather than loss of scent. Miriam's cell phone, pinged by the cellular provider at the request of the sheriff's office, placed her last known location at the corner of Pinehurst and Sapphire Point Parkway at 6:11 in the morning. The phone then went silent. No subsequent pings, no data transmission, nothing. The phone was not recovered from the intersection. The phone has not been recovered. That is the corner Buddy will not cross. Paul tried, for a week, to walk Buddy past that intersection on leash. Buddy would get within 20 feet of the corner and lie down. He would whine. He would resist the leash with a focused strength Paul had not seen in him before. Paul stopped trying after 7 days. He began driving Buddy to a park 2 miles away for walks. Buddy would walk at the park. Buddy would not walk anywhere that required crossing Sapphire Point Parkway. As of the time of this investigation, Buddy is 11 years old and no longer able to walk far because of hip dysplasia. But until his hips failed him, for 17 months, he walked at the park, and he did not approach the intersection where his owner had last been seen. The blood panel performed on Buddy by Dr. Hadley's veterinary colleague at a clinic in Parker, Colorado, on the afternoon of September 15th, approximately 30 hours after Buddy's return, showed a serum cortisol of 54.2 micrograms per deciliter. Normal range, topped at 6. Buddy's level was over 9 times the upper limit. The levels did not return to a reading below 10 micrograms for 5 full days. During those 5 days, the dog ate approximately 30% of his normal food intake, slept fitfully, and did not allow Paul or any other member of the household out of his sight. A repeat panel, 10 days after the event, showed serum cortisol of 11.7, which was still elevated above the upper normal limit. Another panel at 30 days showed 7.9. Buddy's cortisol did not fully normalize until approximately 7 weeks after Miriam disappeared. Paul Thacker has not remarried. He still lives in the Castle Pines home. He still sees Buddy every morning when the dog, now slow and mostly arthritic, hobbles down the stairs to the kitchen for his breakfast. Paul confided by phone, the first time we spoke, that he had never expected to be raising his wife's dog alone. He said the hardest part of his grief during the first year had been looking at Buddy and knowing that the dog knew something Paul would never know and had no way of telling him. He said he had given up trying to coax information from the dog's behavior. He had accepted, by the end of the first year, that whatever had happened at the corner of Pinehurst Drive and Sapphire Point Parkway would remain locked inside a retriever who could not speak. I want to pause here to introduce a case that does not belong to the pattern, but which is important for what it teaches about what this investigation is and what it is not. On the morning of July 28, 2021, a 40-year-old woman named Katherine Janness was walking her dog, a Bernese Mountain Dog mix named Bowie, in Piedmont Park in downtown Atlanta. Katherine was the general manager of a restaurant in the Midtown neighborhood. She had been walking Bowie in Piedmont Park most evenings for years. On the night of July 27th, she had taken Bowie for a late walk around 11 in the evening, later than her usual routine. She never returned home. Her partner, Emma, called police just before 1 in the morning on July 28th. Katherine and Bowie were found by police near an entrance to Piedmont Park. Both had been killed. Both had been killed by a human offender with a knife. The case remains unsolved as of my most recent check. The Fulton County Medical Examiner's autopsy was released. The Atlanta Police Department continues to work the case. The FBI joined the investigation. A reward of $200,000 has been posted. I include Katherine's case here because it is a tragedy, and because it demonstrates what a dog walker attack by a human offender looks like. Katherine was killed. Bowie was killed. There is blood evidence. There are forensic traces of the offender. There are surveillance camera angles to review, witnesses to interview, digital evidence to pull. The investigators are working with the full body of evidence that a human crime produces. Katherine Janness's case is horrifying, and it is frustrating because it remains unsolved despite all of this evidence. But it is not unknowable in the way that the 12 cases in this investigation are unknowable. Katherine was attacked by a person. Bowie was attacked by a person. Both died at the scene. The offender left the scene on foot, on camera, in a direction the police have analyzed. The work of solving Katherine's case is the work of finding the person. That work is hard. It is not outside the framework. What the 12 cases in this investigation show is something different. No bodies at the scene. No blood. No injuries on the dogs. The dogs walking home. The dogs testing for hormone levels that no ordinary morning walk can produce. The dogs refusing routes they have used for years. The dogs dying early of cardiac events. The owners never recovered. The pattern, in its cleanest form, is the pattern of Miriam Thacker. In its varied forms, it is the pattern of the other 11. I will describe them now. 0.8 of a mile is the distance between Walter Ashford's front porch and his nearest neighbor. It is also the distance a 4-year-old black Labrador retriever named Rosie covered alone on a Saturday morning in June of 2019, after returning from a dirt road in Nelson County, Kentucky, without the 71-year-old retired high school mathematics teacher she had walked out the front door with at 5:40. Walter had lived alone since the death of his wife 4 years earlier. He owned 27 acres of mixed pasture and hardwood forest that abutted a Kentucky state forest to the east. His only companion, after his wife died, was Rosie. Walter had purchased her as a puppy from a breeder in Louisville. The dog had, according to Walter's son, Michael, who I spoke with in the fall of 2023, saved Walter's mental health after his wife's death. Walter had not been doing well. Rosie had required routine, required walks, required a reason to get out of the house in the morning. Walter had taken to walking her at dawn along the dirt county road that passed in front of his property. The route was approximately 1.5 miles. Down his driveway, left on the county road, 3/4 of a mile to where the road crossed a creek via an old wooden bridge, and back. Walter walked it every morning. Rosie knew the route well enough that she could have walked it by herself. On Saturday, June 15th, at approximately 5:40 in the morning, Walter and Rosie left the house. Walter's son, Michael, who lived in Louisville and was in the habit of calling his father on Saturday mornings at 8, made the call that morning. Walter did not answer. Michael called again at 8:15, again at 8:30. At 9, he got in his car and drove the 40 minutes to his father's property. When he pulled into the driveway at 9:44, he saw Rosie sitting on the front porch, her leash dragging behind her from her collar. The front door of the house was closed. Walter's truck was parked in its usual spot. Walter was not at the house. Michael approached Rosie. She stood up and circled him anxiously. Her fur was raised along the shoulders. She whined. She pressed against Michael's legs and did not leave them. Michael opened the front door. He called his father's name. He walked through the house. His father was not inside. He went back out to the porch. Rosie was still there. She would not leave the porch. Michael carried her to his car and drove to the creek bridge at the halfway point of his father's walking route. Rosie, when Michael opened the passenger door, would not get out of the car. She stayed on the seat with her body pressed to the far door and her eyes on Michael. Michael walked to the bridge alone. He called his father's name. He heard nothing. He walked the creek in both directions for about 40 minutes. He found no sign of his father. He drove back to the house, carrying Rosie inside, and called the Nelson County Sheriff's Office. The Nelson County Sheriff's response to a missing 71-year-old man in rural country was immediate and appropriate. Deputies arrived within an hour. The working hypothesis at that point, shared among the responding officers, was that Walter had suffered a cardiac event and fallen somewhere off the road into the hardwood forest. He was a widower with known hypertension. The woods on either side of the county road were dense. A search team was organized by early afternoon on that assumption. Tracking dogs were deployed. The search covered approximately 1 square mile of woods surrounding Walter's walking route. Walter was never found. No article of clothing. No sign of a struggle. No indication of any confrontation at or near the creek bridge. The dirt of the road showed Walter's boot prints going out, approaching the bridge. The boot prints reached a specific point approximately 12 feet before the bridge. At that point, they stopped. They did not continue onto the bridge. They did not turn around. They did not step off the road. They simply stopped in the middle of a fine dusting of dry dirt in which every previous footprint had been visible. The dirt beyond the stopping point was undisturbed for approximately 6 feet, and then Rosie's paw prints were visible, heading back toward the house. The tracker who examined the scene, a retired Kentucky State Police officer named Dale, who now worked Canine for the county, told investigators that he could not explain the footprint pattern. A human being does not leave a trail that simply ends. A human being whose trail ends leaves a disturbance at the termination point, a scuff, a shift in the soil, a marker of what happened next. Walter's trail did not leave any such marker. Dale noted this in his report. He added a handwritten sentence at the bottom of the typed section, which I have seen a photocopy of because Michael provided it. The handwritten note said that he had been tracking for 31 years. He had never seen a trail like this one before. Rosie's blood panel, drawn on the afternoon of June 15th at a veterinary clinic in Bardstown, showed serum cortisol of 48.3 micrograms per deciliter. The cortisol did not normalize for 6 days. Rosie subsequently refused to approach the creek bridge for the remainder of her life, which ended 11 months later due to a sudden cardiac event in her sleep. She was 5 years old. The veterinary autopsy, performed at Michael's request, found no underlying cardiac pathology that would have predicted a sudden death. The clinician, in his written report, used the phrase cardiovascular stress consistent with chronic catecholamine elevation, and noted that while the specific mechanism was not determinable post-mortem, the dog's heart showed changes associated with prolonged sympathetic nervous system activation. Walter Ashford was never recovered. Michael Ashford sold his father's property in 2021. He has Rosie's collar in a shoebox in his closet. 7 Ring doorbell cameras and 6 Arlington County public safety cameras captured Katherine Tanner between 5:44 and 5:53 in the morning on Wednesday, April 13, 2022. One additional camera, mounted on a pedestrian bridge over a creek in Arlington, Virginia, captured her at 5:53 and 41 seconds. None of the cameras captured her at 5:53 and 42 seconds. She was 34 years old. She was an epidemiologist employed by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in Atlanta, although she lived in Arlington and had been working remotely for 18 months at the time of her disappearance. She owned a 3-year-old border collie named Molly, whom she had adopted as a puppy after finishing her doctorate. The dog was, according to Katherine's husband Ryan, the reason Katherine had been able to maintain mental health during the extended remote work period. Molly required 2 walks a day, and the morning walk, at 5:45, was Katherine's anchor for the day. She had walked Molly at the same time, along the same route, for 3 years. The route was entirely within a 1-mile radius of Katherine's townhome in the Lion Park neighborhood of Arlington. Out the front door, right on Pershing Drive, 3 blocks north to the Bluemont Junction Trail, a paved pedestrian trail built on an old rail right-of-way, a half-mile loop on the trail, and back. total time approximately 32 minutes. Katherine and Molly walked the route in the dark during most of the year, because Katherine preferred to get the walk done before her first meeting of the day. The route was well lit. The trail was popular with other early morning walkers and joggers. Katherine had, across 3 years of daily walks, become familiar with the other regulars, to the point that she knew most of them by their dogs' names, even when she did not know their own. On Wednesday, April 13th, 2022, at 5:44 in the morning, Katherine and Molly left the townhome. Ryan was in bed. He heard the door close. He went back to sleep. His alarm was set for 6:30. When it went off, Katherine was not in the kitchen. He walked downstairs. He saw Molly by the front door. Her lead still ran from her harness, the other end coiled loose on the floor. The door was closed. Katherine was not in the house. Ryan checked his phone. No messages. He called Katherine. No answer. He put on shoes and walked out the front door. Pershing Drive was empty. He walked to Bluemont Junction Trail. He saw no one. He walked back. He called the Arlington County Police Department at 6:43. The Arlington police response was fast and sophisticated. Arlington County is a densely populated suburb with a well-funded law enforcement infrastructure and considerable experience with missing persons investigations. Detectives arrived within 20 minutes. They canvassed the neighborhood. They pulled surveillance footage from the Bluemont Junction Trail's public safety cameras, of which there were 7. They pulled footage from the Ring doorbell cameras of 14 homes along Katherine's route. The Arlington police had, over the course of the investigation, access to some of the most comprehensive residential surveillance coverage available in the continental United States. The footage showed what Katherine had done. It showed her walking out of the townhome at 5:44. It showed her turning right on Pershing. It showed her approaching the intersection of Pershing and Bluemont. It showed her stepping onto the Bluemont Junction Trail. It then showed her walking eastbound on the trail for approximately 7 minutes. The 7 Ring doorbells along that portion of the trail captured her. 6 of the 7 public safety cameras captured her. One public safety camera, positioned where the trail crossed a pedestrian bridge over a small creek, was the last camera on the route, and was the last camera to capture Katherine. That camera showed her reaching the bridge at 5:53. She stopped at the midpoint of the bridge. She took out her phone and appeared to be looking at it. Molly stood beside her, not pulling on the leash. Katherine's body language in the footage was calm and unhurried. At 5:53 and 41 seconds, the camera's field of view included Katherine and Molly, standing at the midpoint of the bridge. At 5:53 and 42 seconds, Katherine was not there. Molly was still there, on the bridge, with the leash hanging loose. The handle end of the leash, which Katherine had been holding, fell in the same frame in which Katherine disappeared. Molly looked around, and then, with a movement, the Arlington police detective I spoke with, described as shockingly rapid, for a dog just abandoned, reversed direction, and walked calmly back the way she and Katherine had come, the leash trailing. She reached the front door of the townhome at 6:27. She scratched at the door. Ryan did not hear her scratch because he was in a deep final sleep cycle. She lay down on the doorstep and waited. She was there when Ryan opened the door 14 minutes later. The Arlington police worked the case for 6 months as a priority active investigation. They had frame-by-frame video of the moment Katherine Tanner ceased to be visible to a surveillance camera. They had no explanation for what the video showed. They sent the video file to the FBI Forensic Audio Video and Image Analysis Unit at Quantico. The unit's analysis, which I have seen a redacted copy of, confirmed that the video had not been tampered with, that the frame rate was consistent, that no visual artifact such as lens distortion or compression error could account for the disappearance of the subject between consecutive frames, and that the observed event was, as the analyst wrote, outside the range of conventional kinetic events for objects of the subject's mass. Molly's blood panel, drawn at an emergency veterinary clinic in Arlington at 10 in the morning on April 13th, showed serum cortisol of 51.8 micrograms per deciliter. Katherine Tanner was never located. Ryan Tanner still lives in the Arlington townhome. He still has Molly. Molly has not crossed the pedestrian bridge on the Bluemont Junction Trail in 3 years. She walks the trail. She walks up to a point approximately 20 feet from the bridge's western abutment. She lies down. She will not proceed. Ryan has, at various times, tried to carry her across the bridge. She does not resist him when he carries her, but as soon as he sets her down on the other side, she turns around and walks back to the western abutment and lies down again and waits to be carried back. Ryan stopped trying after approximately a year. He walks Molly to the bridge every morning anyway, because Molly insists on it. She insists on walking to the exact spot, approximately 20 feet from the bridge, where Katherine's scent presumably ends for her, and she lies down in that spot, and she does not move, and Ryan sits with her, and they wait for something neither of them can name to either return or confirm its absence. Molly has been doing this for 3 years. Ryan said, when I interviewed him in the summer of 2024, that he has come to understand the daily ritual as Molly's version of grief. He said that after the first year, he had stopped questioning it and started participating in it. He said that if Molly's body lets her keep doing this for as long as he has her, he would keep going to the bridge with her every morning, and he would sit with her, and they would wait, and he would not ask her to move until she was ready, and that if he was honest, he would say she is never going to be ready, and neither is he. Harold raised his coffee mug to the empty window at 6:30 on a Tuesday morning in March of 2018. The woman he expected to raise her hand back, a 68-year-old widow named Dolores Fenwick, who walked past his villa every morning at that time, did not appear. Her small Shih Tzu Pepper was not walking with her. There was nothing to wave at. Harold, a retired accountant in a retirement community called Sunstone Village on the western edge of Venice, Florida, waited 15 minutes and then walked to her door. Dolores had moved to Sunstone Village with her husband Earl a decade earlier, after his retirement from a career in insurance in Indianapolis. Earl had died of pancreatic cancer in 2015. Dolores had stayed. She had, in the 2.5 years since Earl's death, built a life inside the community that centered on Pepper, on a weekly bridge group, on a small library volunteer shift she took on Wednesdays, and on a 4-mile morning walk she did with the dog along the community's interior paved paths. Sunstone Village is not the kind of retirement development that makes the news. It has roughly 800 residents, most of them over 60, living in modest 1- and 2-bedroom villas arranged on a grid of landscaped walking paths. There are no surrounding fences, but the community is set back from the main road behind a low wall and a security gate at the single entrance. The gate is staffed from 7 in the morning until 10 in the evening and unstaffed outside those hours, with a digital keypad providing entry to residents and registered visitors. The walking paths are lit by low-sodium vapor lamps on 7-foot posts. Surveillance cameras cover the entry gate and the clubhouse. The interior paths are not covered by cameras. Dolores walked Pepper every morning at 6:15. Her route went west from her villa along Dahlia Path, south onto Hibiscus Trail, east on Palmetto Way, past the community pool, north on Coral Bell Path, and back to her villa. Total time, approximately 40 minutes. She had walked the route for 10 years. She had done it with Earl when he was alive. She had done it with Pepper after he died. Several of her neighbors knew her walking schedule by sight. A man named Harold, who lived 3 villas down from Dolores, made his coffee in his front window every morning at 6:30, and he would raise his mug at her through the glass when she walked past. She would raise her hand back. This had been the routine for years. On Tuesday, March 6th, Harold made his coffee at 6:30. He watched the window. Dolores did not walk past. He waited until 6:45. Still nothing. Harold knew Dolores's routine well enough to know something was off, but he was a retired accountant and not a man who jumped to conclusions. He assumed she was running late. At 7, he walked to her villa. Pepper was standing on Dolores's doormat. A lead still clipped to her harness dragged loose on the ground behind her. The front door of the villa was closed. Harold knocked. He got no answer. He opened the door, which was unlocked, called Dolores's name, and when he got no answer, he called 911 from his cell phone at 7:03 in the morning. The Sarasota County Sheriff's Office response was experienced. Sunstone Village had been the location of 2 previous missing person calls in the past 6 years, both of which had turned out to be elderly residents who had wandered due to cognitive impairment and had been found within several hours. Deputies assumed a similar scenario with Dolores. They mobilized a neighborhood search. They notified the local hospitals. They walked the community's pond perimeter. They had a Canine unit on scene by 9 in the morning. The Canine handler, after presenting the tracking dog with one of Dolores's cardigans from her bedroom, began the trace at her front door. The tracking dog led the handler along Dahlia Path West, then south onto Hibiscus Trail. Exactly halfway down Hibiscus Trail, at a point near the intersection with Oleander Lane, the tracking dog's behavior shifted. The dog, according to the handler's report, began pulling backward on the leash. The dog tried to retreat toward Dolores's villa. The handler, who had worked tracking for 8 years in Sarasota County, had not seen a tracking dog reverse course from a live scent before. The handler forced the dog forward by approximately 15 feet to the center of the Oleander Lane intersection, and the dog lay down flat on the pavement and refused to move. The handler tried to lift the dog. The dog's body, according to the report, had become rigid, muscles locked, eyes dilated. The handler carried the dog back to his vehicle and did not continue the trace. Pepper, meanwhile, had been taken into the custody of Dolores's daughter, a woman named Brenda who had driven from Orlando on receiving the call. Brenda took Pepper to an emergency veterinary clinic in Venice at approximately 2 in the afternoon. The veterinarian drew blood. The serum cortisol came back at 49.7 micrograms per deciliter. Pepper's levels did not normalize for 4 days. Pepper, who had been a cheerful and social dog before the event, refused to approach the south side of Dolores's villa after the event. Brenda took Pepper home to Orlando. Pepper lived 4 more years, never returned to Sunstone Village, and died of congestive heart failure at age 11, 2 years earlier than the breed average. Dolores Fenwick remains missing. The Sarasota County Sheriff's investigation covered every villa in Sunstone Village. Every resident was interviewed. Every vehicle that had entered the community between midnight and 8 in the morning on March 6th was identified. Every delivery driver was accounted for. The community's surveillance cameras at the gate captured nothing unusual. The 2 cameras at the clubhouse, which faced the north side of the property and did not cover Hibiscus Trail, captured no human motion in the relevant window. The sheriff's office eventually transitioned the case to cold case status in 2020. It remains open. Brenda explained by phone in 2023 that the thing she could not reconcile, 2 years after her mother's disappearance, was that her mother had spent a decade building a life inside the community that she considered safe. Her mother had chosen Sunstone Village specifically because it was a place where people who had lost their spouses could walk alone in the morning without fear. Brenda said her mother had been wrong. She did not say it with anger. She said it with a kind of quiet despair that had settled in over the years and had become indistinguishable, at the time we spoke, from her normal speaking voice. There was one additional element from the Fenwick case I want to describe. Harold, the retired accountant who had first noticed that Dolores had not walked past his window, was interviewed by a deputy twice on the morning of the event and a week later. In the second interview, Harold recalled something he had not mentioned the first time. He had, in the window between 6:30 and 6:45 on the morning of March 6th, briefly heard a sound he had initially attributed to a distant lawnmower starting up, a low, sustained mechanical hum lasting approximately 4 seconds, then silence. He had thought nothing of it. He had gone back to his coffee. In the subsequent week, as he mulled the event, he had realized that 6:30 in the morning in a retirement community in March was an unusual time for a lawnmower. The community's landscaping crew arrived at 8. No resident would have been running a mower at that hour. Harold's recollection was added to the Sarasota County case file. It matched nothing else in the file. The deputy who took the follow-up statement, according to the copy Brenda later obtained, had noted in the margin that Harold was a reliable witness of otherwise unremarkable testimony. No action was taken on the observation. Rachel Beal heard 3 seconds of sound at 7:04 on a Friday morning in October of 2020, and that 3 seconds became, across the subsequent years of her life, the only physical evidence she would retain of what happened to her husband. The sound was a large dog running at full speed down the driveway toward the house, accompanied by a low-frequency hum she initially mistook for a truck on the neighboring street. She was reading in bed. Her husband Nathan, 42 years old, a software engineer who worked from home, had left the house at 6:35 to walk their 3-year-old German Shepherd Hank to the end of the cul-de-sac. The cul-de-sac, a dead end on a street called Whispering Oak Court in Eden Prairie, Minnesota, terminated at a wooded parcel of undeveloped land that abutted a Three Rivers Park District preserve. Nathan and Hank had walked there every weekday morning for 2 years. Hank, 98 pounds, working line, was bonded primarily to Nathan. Rachel heard him come back. She did not hear Nathan. Nathan's walking route was short. Whispering Oak Court was a dead-end cul-de-sac with 7 houses arranged in a circle at its terminus. At the end of the cul-de-sac, beyond the last house, was a wooded parcel of undeveloped land that extended for approximately 200 yards before terminating at the boundary of a Three Rivers Park District preserve. Nathan walked Hank to the end of the cul-de-sac, let him off leash to run in the wooded parcel, and recalled him after 10 or 15 minutes to walk back. The total outing took 20 minutes. Nathan had done this walk every weekday morning for 2 years. Hank knew the woods. Hank had never strayed. On Friday, October 2nd, Nathan left the house at 6:35 in the morning. It was still dark. The sky was beginning to lighten at the eastern horizon. Rachel was awake and sitting in bed reading a book. She heard Nathan leave. She heard Hank's claws on the front walkway. She continued reading. At 7:04, she heard what she later described to the Eden Prairie Police as a sound like a dog running at full speed down the driveway, accompanied by a sound she could not identify, a low-frequency hum that she thought was a truck on the neighboring street, but which she later was not sure about. The sounds lasted perhaps 3 seconds. Then she heard Hank barking at the front door, frantically, a type of barking she had not heard from him before. Rachel went downstairs. Hank was at the door, pawing at it. His harness was on. His lead trailed behind him, the free end frayed, in a way that suggested Nathan had let go of it abruptly, and it had been dragged over a rough surface. Hank's fur along his entire spine was raised. His eyes were wide. When Rachel opened the door to let him in, Hank did not come inside. He ran back toward the cul-de-sac, then turned around and came back to the porch, then ran toward the cul-de-sac again. He repeated this 5 or 6 times. Rachel understood what he was doing. She called 911. The Eden Prairie Police arrived in 6 minutes. The officers walked the cul-de-sac with Rachel. Hank led them, though with increasing reluctance as they approached the dead end. At the edge of the wooded parcel, where Nathan would normally have unleashed the dog, Hank sat down in the dirt and would not proceed. The lead officer, a sergeant named Gary, who had 21 years on the Eden Prairie Force, initially worked the hypothesis of a targeted abduction for ransom. Nathan's employer was a regional software company, and Nathan drew a 6-figure salary. The cul-de-sac was isolated enough that a vehicle could wait at the dead end without being observed from the main road. Gary thought in terms of someone who knew Nathan's schedule, Nathan's route, and Nathan's financial footprint. He instructed patrol units to watch for a vehicle leaving the immediate area at speed. None was observed. No ransom demand came, then or later. Rachel's phone was monitored for the subsequent 2 weeks. Nothing. Gary walked into the woods with his partner. They searched for approximately 30 minutes in the pre-dawn gray light. They found nothing. They came back out. The sergeant called for additional units. By 9 in the morning, there were 14 officers and a K-9 unit on the scene. The K-9 team entered the woods and searched for 2 hours. The tracking dog worked a scent trail to a specific location approximately 60 yards into the woods, circled a small clearing 3 times, and sat down. The handler could not re-engage the dog. The search continued on foot for the rest of the day and into the following day, without finding any trace of Nathan. No disturbance in the soil at the clearing. No broken branches. No blood. Nothing. Hank's blood work, drawn at the emergency vet clinic in Eden Prairie at approximately 4 in the afternoon on October 2nd, read 53.6 micrograms per deciliter. His levels took 5 days to normalize. He did not approach the end of Whispering Oak Court again during his lifetime. He lived for 6 more years. When Rachel and the boys took him on walks after Nathan's disappearance, they had to turn around one house short of the dead end, or Hank would plant his feet and refuse to continue. Rachel accommodated him. She walked the dog the opposite direction, toward the main road. Hank was content to walk anywhere that did not involve the end of the street. Rachel Beal sold the house in the summer of 2022 and moved with the boys to a suburb on the other side of the Twin Cities. She said when we spoke in 2024 that the move had been necessary for the boys because the older boy had developed a fear of going to the mailbox at the end of the driveway after his father's disappearance. He would ask Rachel to walk with him. If she was not home, he would not go. The younger boy did not have the same fear, but he had developed a habit of waking up at 6:30 every morning and sitting at the kitchen window watching the empty driveway. Rachel did not know what to say to him about this. She had eventually stopped trying to say anything. She had begun sitting with him at the window in the morning, drinking her coffee, watching nothing arrive. At 6:03 on a Thursday morning in May of 2017, a cell phone belonging to a 29-year-old occupational therapist named Amanda Oats pinged a cell tower in Eugene, Oregon, for the last time. The ping placed her approximately a quarter-mile north of where she had entered Ruth Bascom Riverbank Park and begun walking her 5-year-old English Springer Spaniel Duke along the paved Greenway Trail beside the Willamette River. After 6:03, the phone did not transmit again. It was not turned off. It was not low on battery. It was, as far as Verizon's records showed, operational and within range of the tower. It simply stopped communicating. Amanda lived in a small apartment in a mid-rise building 3 blocks from the river. She had rescued Duke from a Portland shelter 3 years earlier. Duke was well-trained, quiet on leash, and followed Amanda closely without pulling. Amanda's morning route took her from her apartment to Ruth Bascom Riverbank Park and along the paved Greenway Trail that ran beside the river for several miles. She typically walked north for 20 minutes, turned around, and walked back. Her total time was approximately 45 minutes. The route passed under 2 pedestrian bridges and alongside a small marina. The trail was used heavily by morning joggers, cyclists, and dog walkers. It was well lit at the bridges and in shorter sections, though there were stretches where the lighting was dim. Amanda had walked the route almost daily since moving to Eugene 18 months before her disappearance. On Thursday, May 11th, Amanda left her apartment at 5:48 in the morning. A neighbor who was leaving for a job in a hospital kitchen saw her in the lobby and exchanged a nod with her. That was the last sighting of Amanda by any witness. At 6:22 in the morning, Duke arrived alone at the front door of Amanda's apartment building. He was led into the lobby by the same neighbor, who had been on her way out to drive to work, and who recognized the dog. The neighbor, whose name was Brenda, tried to reach Amanda by phone. Amanda did not answer. Brenda escorted Duke up the elevator to Amanda's floor and knocked on her door. No answer. Brenda called the building manager, who let her into Amanda's apartment. Amanda was not there. Brenda called the Eugene police. The Eugene police search began at 7 in the morning. The Riverbank Greenway was covered by the Eugene police, by Lane County Sheriff's deputies, and by a small team of volunteers who gathered within hours of Amanda's disappearance, hitting social media. The trail was searched along its entire length within Amanda's walking radius. The river was dragged at several points over the following days. Nothing was found. No sign of struggle. No articles of Amanda's clothing. No cell phone. Amanda's phone, according to Verizon's response to a police subpoena, had last pinged a cell tower at 6:03 in the morning, at a location consistent with a point along the Greenway Trail, about a quarter-mile north of where she had started. After 6:03, the phone did not transmit again. Duke's blood panel at a veterinary clinic in Eugene at 2:30 in the afternoon on May 11th showed serum cortisol of 47.2 micrograms per deciliter. His behavior after the event matched the pattern. He refused, for the rest of his life, to walk on the Ruth Bascom Riverbank Park Greenway Trail. Amanda's mother, a woman named Dorothy, who I spoke with in the spring of 2023, had taken Duke to live with her in Salem after Amanda's disappearance. Dorothy walked Duke every morning along the streets of her neighborhood. Duke did well on those walks. He did not do well if Dorothy ever drove past a body of water with him in the car. He would start whining at the sight of water. She had learned, eventually, not to take routes that involved the Willamette. Dorothy said she could not fully articulate what her daughter's dog had been responding to. She said she had come to think of Duke as a kind of witness who had never been able to testify. Amanda Oats has never been located. The Eugene police transferred the case to cold case status in 2021. Her family has continued to offer a reward. No information meeting the threshold has been received. A Harlequin Great Dane, 36 inches at the shoulder, 160 pounds, bonded so deeply to his owner that the bond itself became evidence in the case file. The Great Dane was named Atlas. His owner was a 54-year-old commercial real estate broker named Gregory Thorp. On a Monday morning in August of 2016, at approximately 6:10, Atlas returned alone to a large home in the Draper Heights subdivision, which had been built into the slope of the Wasatch Mountains on the eastern edge of the Salt Lake metropolitan area. The dog had been on a mountain access footpath 35 minutes earlier with Gregory. Nothing about the dog had changed physically in those 35 minutes. No blood, no injury, no sign of a fight. But a 160-pound dog bonded at that level does not permit his owner to be taken without resisting. Atlas had not resisted. Atlas had come home. Gregory walked Atlas every morning on a mountain access footpath that began at the back edge of the Draper Heights development and climbed gradually through scrub oak and wild sage to a small plateau approximately 3/4 of a mile from his house. Gregory's routine was to walk to the plateau, stand for a few minutes watching the sun come up over the Wasatch Peaks, and walk back. The full outing was about 50 minutes. Helen had walked it with him many times. She knew the route. She knew the plateau. She had sat there watching sunrises with her husband dozens of times. On Monday, August 22nd, Gregory left the house at 5:30 in the morning. Helen was awake, drinking coffee in the kitchen. She heard him leave. She went about her morning. At 7:08, Atlas returned to the house alone. Helen watched him climb the back patio steps. His lead was clipped to his harness, the free end dragging. Atlas pushed through the screen door into the kitchen. His flanks were heaving. His fur was raised along his entire back. He sat down at Helen's feet and would not get up. Helen called out for Gregory. She got no answer. She called Gregory's cell phone. It rang and went to voicemail. She called the Draper Police Department. Draper Police and Salt Lake County Sheriff's Search and Rescue responded within 40 minutes. The initial working theory, based on the terrain and the frequency of wildlife encounters on the Wasatch foothill trails, was a mountain lion attack. The region had documented 3 mountain lion sightings within 2 miles of Draper Heights in the previous year. A lion capable of taking a 160-pound dog's owner would, the deputies reasoned, have left kill evidence, drag marks, or partial remains within a short radius. The SAR team mobilized a search of the footpath and the plateau. They searched the scrub oak on both sides of the trail. They flew a small drone with thermal imaging over the search area during the cooler morning hours. They extended the search westward and upslope. The search continued for 4 days. Nothing was found. No blood, no fur, no drag marks, no lion scat in the immediate area. A SAR tracker, working with a borrowed bloodhound from the Utah County Sheriff's Canine unit, followed Gregory's scent trail up the footpath and stopped at the plateau, where the dog circled twice, sat down, and refused to continue. The handler reported the same behavior I had seen in the other cases. The dog would not move forward. The dog wanted to leave the plateau and return toward the subdivision. Atlas's blood work, drawn at an emergency vet clinic in Sandy at 11 in the morning on August 22nd, showed 46.9 micrograms per deciliter. His cortisol normalized over 6 days. Atlas, who had been trained to walk on leash to the plateau, refused the walk afterward. Helen, who continued trying to walk Atlas at least once a day for exercise, had to abandon the mountain footpath entirely and drive Atlas to a dog park in Sandy for walks. Gregory Thorp was never located. Helen Thorp still lives in the Draper Heights home. She no longer walks on the mountain footpath herself. She shared in 2023 that she had sat on the back patio for weeks after her husband's disappearance, watching the footpath for him to come back down. She had stopped watching after about a year. She had started watching again, intermittently, in the second year. She said she was aware that she was not really expecting him anymore, but was watching anyway. She said the patio chair had a groove worn in the cushion where she sat. She said her daughter, who lived in Phoenix, had suggested she move. She said she had thought about moving. She had decided to stay. She said the groove in the cushion was, at this point in her life, a kind of home she wasn't willing to leave. A fisherman on the beach at 6:10 in the morning saw a 9-pound Pomeranian walking alone along the wet sand. He recognized the dog. He had seen her walking with her owner many mornings, always on the same stretch of Emerald Isle, North Carolina. The owner's name was Joyce Braithweight, 62, retired hospice nurse, widow. The fisherman waited for her to appear behind the dog. She did not. It was a Saturday in July of 2023. Joyce had owned the small beachfront cottage on that stretch of shore for 20 years. She lived there year-round with her dog, Coco. Joyce walked her on a harness and a retractable leash along the beach every morning before the summer crowds arrived. The beach access near Joyce's cottage consisted of a wooden boardwalk that crossed the dune line from the road to a set of wooden steps down to the sand. Joyce walked the boardwalk at 5:30 every morning, took Coco onto the beach, and walked her north for about a quarter mile before turning around. The beach at 5:30 in July was nearly empty, a few fishermen casting from the shore, sometimes a cyclist, usually not another dog walker for the first half hour. Joyce walked the same stretch every day. On Saturday, July 22nd, at approximately 6:10 in the morning, a fisherman named Calvin, who was casting about 200 yards north of Joyce's access point, noticed Coco walking toward him along the wet sand. Coco was alone. Her lead trailed in the sand behind her. Calvin recognized Joyce's dog because he had seen them walking together many mornings. He waited for Joyce to appear behind her. She did not. Coco approached Calvin, stopped about 10 feet from him, turned in a tight circle, and then walked past him, continuing north along the beach. Calvin, puzzled but not yet alarmed, returned to his cast. About 10 minutes later, he packed up his gear and walked south along the beach toward Joyce's access point. He found Joyce's boardwalk. At the base of the boardwalk steps in the sand, he found Joyce's cell phone. The phone was face up. The screen was dark. There were no footprints leading away from the phone. The sand immediately around the phone was undisturbed. Calvin walked up the boardwalk. He walked to the road. He did not see Joyce. He walked to her cottage, which was visible from the road, and knocked on the door. No answer. He walked back to the boardwalk and called 911 from his own phone. The Carteret County Sheriff's Office arrived at 6:40 in the morning. The initial theory, almost immediately, was a rip current. Emerald Isle averages 2 drowning deaths per summer from rip currents. Most of them swimmers caught off guard at dawn or dusk when the beach is empty. A 62-year-old woman walking her small dog at low tide, perhaps stepping too close to the surf line, perhaps losing her footing, was exactly the profile the sheriff's office knew to worry about first. By 8 in the morning, the Coast Guard had a helicopter up, scanning the near shore water for a body or debris field. By 10, there were 30 volunteers walking the beach in both directions. The search continued for 6 days. No body was recovered, no debris, no article of Joyce's clothing washed up. The Coast Guard withdrew after 72 hours, noting in its report that the tide and current patterns from the relevant morning did not match the drift vectors of any human body the sheriff might now be looking for. Coco, meanwhile, had wandered all the way to the next beach access approximately 1 mile north, where a family renting a cottage took her in and contacted the Carteret County Animal Services. Coco was reunited with Joyce's daughter, a woman named Susan who had driven from Raleigh. Susan took Coco to a vet in Morehead City on the afternoon of July 22nd. The blood works came back at 44.6 micrograms per deciliter. The signature was there again, 8 times the upper limit of normal for a calm adult dog, resolving not over the 12 to 24 hours a normal stress response would predict, but over 4 days. The curve Dr. Hadley had now documented in 7 prior cases and would document in 4 after. Coco had bilateral tremor in her hind legs that persisted for 3 days. Coco refused beaches for the rest of her life. Susan, who continued to care for Coco, could not drive her to any coastal area without the dog becoming visibly distressed. Susan eventually stopped visiting her mother's cottage. She put the cottage on the market in 2024. It sold to a family from Charlotte. Joyce Braithweight has never been found, as her cell phone, recovered from the sand, was analyzed by the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation. The phone's last activity had been a text message sent to Susan at 5:31 in the morning, saying Joyce was heading out for her walk. After that, nothing. The phone had not been turned off. It had simply stopped transmitting. The battery was at 61% when recovered. The phone was operational when the SBI examined it. There was no explanation for why it had ceased communicating with the cellular network at the moment Joyce ceased being present on the beach. Susan Braithweight described by phone in the fall of 2024 that what bothered her most about her mother's case was the undisturbed sand around the phone. She said the sand had looked, in the photographs the sheriff's office showed her, like the phone had been placed there carefully, not dropped in a struggle, not flung, placed. She had, in the 2 years since, tried to think of a scenario in which the phone would have come to rest on dry sand without disturbing the surface around it, and she had not come up with one. Susan also shared something else that I have thought about since. She said she had gone back to the cottage alone approximately 4 months after her mother's disappearance to begin the process of sorting through Joyce's belongings. She had spent 2 days walking the rooms and opening closets and making piles. On the second evening, she had taken Coco down to the boardwalk for a short walk. Coco had come with her willingly to the front door of the cottage, then gone to the car. Once in the car, Coco had sat on the passenger seat facing straight ahead. Susan had driven to the boardwalk entrance, a distance of approximately 30 yards. She had parked. She had reached for the leash. Coco had backed up against the passenger door and would not move. Susan had carried her to the boardwalk steps. Coco had not resisted being carried, but her body had been rigid. Susan had set her down at the top of the steps. Coco had turned, without urgency or panic, and had walked back toward the parked car. She had stopped beside the car and looked up at Susan. Susan had understood. Coco would not walk the beach, would never walk the beach. Susan had carried Coco back to the passenger seat and driven home. On the drive back, Susan had cried for the first time in 6 weeks. The footprints reached the water's edge and stopped. They did not return. The soft earth beside a small pond on the edge of Medina, Ohio, on a Friday morning in September of 2015, held the clear impressions of a size 7 women's walking shoe right up to the waterline, and not past it. The pond was 30 feet across at its widest, and nowhere more than 4 feet deep. The woman who had left those prints, a 45-year-old elementary school special education teacher named Patricia Edmunds, was not in the pond, not under it, not beyond it. Patricia lived with her husband Todd and their twin 13-year-old sons in a new construction colonial in a subdivision called Fieldstone Farms. The subdivision had been built 5 years earlier on what had previously been the edge of a working dairy farm. Several of the houses backed onto a strip of woods that bordered the remaining farm fields. Patricia's house was one of these. Her morning walking companion was a 4-year-old beagle named Scout. Patricia walked Scout every morning at 5:55, out her back gate, along a narrow dirt track that ran between her property line and the farm fields, south for half a mile to the pond, and back. On Friday, September 11th, Patricia and Scout left the house at 5:53. Todd was in the shower upstairs. He heard the back gate click. He did not think about it again. He came downstairs at 6:50. Patricia was not in the kitchen. Scout was on the back porch, sitting at the door, leash still attached, the other end of the leash hanging loose from the porch railing, where it had apparently caught and been pulled free as Scout came up the steps. Scout scratched at the back door when Todd looked through the glass. Todd let him in. Todd checked the garage. Patricia's car was there. He called her phone. It rang. He could hear it ringing from somewhere in the house, muted. He found it on the kitchen counter, where Patricia had left it while she walked. This was common. Patricia did not like to carry her phone on her walk. Todd walked out the back gate. He walked the dirt track to the pond. He saw nothing. He called his wife's name. He saw nothing. He walked back to the house and called the Medina County Sheriff's Office. The sheriff's search of the dirt track and the farm fields was extensive. Canine tracking dogs followed Patricia's scent to a specific point approximately 300 yards from her back gate, at the edge of the pond, where the scent trail terminated. The handler's report used the phrase scent collapses. Patricia had left footprints in the soft earth beside the pond. The footprints led to the water's edge and stopped. They did not return. The pond was dragged that afternoon and the following day. The pond was a small one, no more than 30 feet across at its widest, and nowhere more than 4 feet deep. Patricia was not in the pond. The divers, 2 retired rescue divers brought in from the Cleveland area by the sheriff's office, confirmed that the pond bottom was flat, sandy, and visible to the surface throughout. There was nowhere for a body to be concealed. Scout's serum draw at a clinic in Medina on the afternoon of September 11th read 43.8 micrograms per deciliter. He normalized over 5 days. Scout, according to Todd's account to me when we spoke in 2023, developed a specific and enduring fear of standing water. He would refuse to walk near the farm pond. He would refuse to cross bridges over any body of water. He would not drink from a large water bowl after the event, only from a small bowl that was refilled frequently. Todd observed, over the course of several years, that Scout appeared to be specifically sensitive to reflections on water surfaces. When Todd took the twins fishing at a pond at a state park, he could not bring Scout. Scout would see the water and flatten himself to the ground. Todd took this as something he would not try to explain. Patricia Edmunds remains missing. Todd Edmunds remarried in 2020. He continues to live in the same house. The twins are 22 now and both in college. Scout died in 2022 at age 11 of an apparent stroke. Todd said that Scout's death had been the second grief of his life, the second loss of a witness to something he would never understand. Emily, the barista, had Robert Callaway's small coffee ready at 6:15 in the morning because he had walked past her front window at that time, every weekday, for 2.5 years. On Wednesday, October 26, 2022, his coffee sat on the counter growing cold. The 67-year-old retired postal worker did not walk past. His 9-year-old Cocker Spaniel Hershey appeared instead on the sidewalk across the street, alone, leash trailing, at 6:30. Robert had lived in Middlebury, Vermont, for 42 years in a federal-style house a few blocks from the Middlebury College campus. He had retired from the post office 7 years earlier. He was a widower. Hershey had been his constant companion for 9 of those years. Robert's walking route took him from his house down Seminary Street, across the Otter Creek Bridge, through the small commercial district past the bookstore and the pharmacy, and back via a loop through the residential streets north of the college. Total distance, 1.25 miles. Duration, approximately 35 minutes. Robert had walked the route almost daily for 7 years. Merchants and baristas knew him by sight. The barista at the coffee shop on Main Street, a college student named Emily, had Robert's small coffee ready for him when he walked past the front window at approximately 6:15 in the morning on his return leg. On Wednesday, October 26th, Emily prepared Robert's coffee at 6:15. He did not walk past. She waited. Robert had never been more than 5 minutes off schedule in the 2.5 years she had worked there. At 6:30, she looked out the window and saw Hershey on the sidewalk across Main Street, sitting by the curb, leash dragging. She recognized the dog immediately. Hershey was a regular fixture of Robert's morning. Emily walked outside and approached the dog. Hershey was trembling. Emily crouched and gathered the leash. She looked up and down Main Street. She saw no one she recognized. She walked Hershey back across the street, into the coffee shop, and called the Middlebury Police Department from the landline behind the counter. The Middlebury police search spanned the entire downtown area. The Otter Creek was walked in both directions. The bridge was examined. The bookstore and pharmacy and every business along Robert's route opened early to allow officers to check interior surveillance footage. The footage from 6 businesses captured Robert that morning. He had walked past the bookstore at 5:57. He had walked past the pharmacy at 5:59. He had crossed the Otter Creek Bridge eastbound at 6:02. He had continued north on Main Street, and then the cameras stopped capturing him. A camera at an insurance office on the north side of Main Street, which had Robert in frame as a distant figure at 6:07, lost him in frame at 6:07 and 40 seconds. The camera continued recording. Hershey walked back into the camera's frame at 6:13. He was alone. The lead ran loose behind him. He walked south, across the Otter Creek Bridge, and eventually to the curb where Emily would find him. He moved like a dog, returning from somewhere. The Middlebury police officer who reviewed the footage was a sergeant named Kyle. He said, when I spoke with him in 2024, that he had watched the footage from the insurance office camera more than 50 times. He had watched Robert pass through the frame, head in the direction of the residential streets, and then not appear on any subsequent footage. He said that the most disturbing thing to him, as someone who had grown up in Middlebury and who had known Robert for years, was not that there was no footage showing Robert after 6:07 and 40 seconds. The disturbing thing was the gap. 6 minutes of gap, during which Hershey must have been somewhere and must have been doing something, and the Middlebury police had no camera coverage and no witness who had seen the dog during those 6 minutes. The dog had simply walked back into frame at 6:13, heading south, in the manner of a dog returning from somewhere. Hershey's cortisol, drawn at the Middlebury Animal Hospital at 11 that morning, was 45.1 micrograms per deciliter. He normalized over 4 days. He refused to walk north on Main Street past the Otter Creek Bridge for the remaining 4 years of his life. Robert's daughter, who lived in Burlington and had taken Hershey into her home after her father's disappearance, mentioned that she had eventually given up on trying to walk the dog along routes that involved crossing water. She said she had come to think of the dog's avoidance as her father's last communication, delivered through the dog, in a language she could not fully understand. Robert Callaway has never been found. There is one additional element from the Middlebury case that I want to record, because it was shared with me privately by Sergeant Kyle at the end of our interview, and I think it belongs in the public record. Kyle shared that in the 3 weeks following Robert's disappearance, he had personally walked the north side of Main Street every morning between 6:05 and 6:15. He had done this on his own time, not as part of any official investigation. He had stood at the insurance office where the last footage had been recorded. He had watched the sidewalk where Robert had last been visible. He was not, he clarified, expecting to see anything. He was simply unable to stop going there. He said the walks had been a thing he owed Robert. He had, over those 3 weeks, noticed nothing. No vehicles behaving unusually. No pedestrians he did not recognize. No sounds or smells or environmental features that he could not account for. What he had noticed was the absence itself. The sidewalk was, in his description, the same sidewalk that he had been walking for 21 years, and on it was, at 6:07 and 40 seconds every morning, a particular quality of emptiness that he could not shake. He stopped going after 3 weeks because his wife had asked him to stop, and because he realized he was not going to find what he was looking for, and because the emptiness at that spot was beginning to affect him in a way he did not want to acknowledge. He admitted that he had not been back to that sidewalk in the morning in the 18 months since. but that he drove past the insurance office on his way to work every day, and that at 6:07 and 40 seconds, even when he was on a different street, his body knew what time it was. Lucas Winters felt his body tilt while he was lying in bed asleep on a Tuesday morning in June of 2020. He woke briefly, disoriented, his sense of up and down scrambled in a way that did not match his physical position on the mattress. The sensation lasted perhaps 2 seconds. He went back to sleep. Approximately 40 minutes later, his wife's 4-year-old Siberian Husky Coda returned from a morning walk alone, and his wife did not return at all. Her name was Tara Winters. She was 31 years old. She was a registered nurse on night shifts at Flagstaff Medical Center. She walked Coda in the mornings after her shifts on an unpaved dirt access road that served an exurban development called Coconino Ridge, 5-acre lots at the edge of Forest Service land outside Flagstaff, Arizona. She had been a night shift nurse for 7 years. The dog walk was her transition between work and sleep. Her route ran from her property along the dirt access road that served the exurban lots, approximately 3/4 of a mile out and 3/4 of a mile back. The road was unpaved, lined with ponderosa pine and scrub juniper, and traveled by only the handful of residents of the Coconino Ridge development and the occasional delivery driver. The road terminated in a cul-de-sac loop at the far end of the development, beyond which was undeveloped Forest Service land. On Tuesday, June 9th, Tara got home from her shift at 5:30 in the morning. Lucas was asleep. Tara changed into walking clothes, clipped Coda to his leash, and left the house at 5:40. The first full light of morning was visible along the eastern horizon. The temperature was approximately 52 degrees. Lucas, asleep in the bedroom at the back of the house, would later tell the Coconino County Sheriff that he had not heard Tara come home. He had heard nothing unusual that morning. At 6:40 in the morning, Coda returned to the house alone. He went to the back sliding door, which was the door Tara used when she returned from walks, and scratched at the glass. Lucas woke up. He went downstairs. He saw Coda at the door. He opened it. Coda came in. Tara was not with him. Lucas went out the front door and looked down the access road. He saw no one. He called Tara's cell phone. It went to voicemail. He called the Coconino County Sheriff's Office at 6:49. The sheriff's response was the most extensive any of the 12 cases received. Coconino County covers a vast area, including wilderness and remote terrain, and the sheriff's search and rescue team is accustomed to high-resource searches. The initial internal working theory, which Lucas learned about only later through a detective's offhand comment, was that Tara had walked off voluntarily. The deputies considered the profile and noted 3 factors. She was young, 31, healthy, employed. She worked night shifts in a high-stress ICU that accounted for nurse burnout. She was unmarried to Lucas, who was her partner, not her spouse. For the first 48 hours, portions of the investigation were directed at whether Tara had taken a rideshare out of the area, had booked flights under her own name, had activity on any of her accounts. She had not. She had no rideshare records, no flight bookings, no banking activity, no credit card movement after 5:30 in the morning on June 9th. The voluntary theory was quietly abandoned by day 4. By that point, the search included 14 deputies, 8 volunteers, 2 Canine handlers and their dogs, a drone operator with thermal imaging, and an Arizona Department of Public Safety helicopter dispatched from Phoenix at the sheriff's request. The search covered approximately 9 square miles over the following 3 days. Tara was not found. Nothing belonging to Tara was found. Her cell phone was not recovered. One of the Canine tracking dogs did lock onto Tara's scent along the access road and followed it to a specific point on the cul-de-sac loop at the far end of the development. At that point, the dog stopped, backed away, and sat down. The handler, who had worked Coconino County searches for 11 years, noted in his report that the dog's behavior was not consistent with scent loss. The dog had the scent. The dog did not want to continue following it. Coda's blood draw at a Flagstaff vet clinic in the afternoon of June 9th came back at 48.4 micrograms per deciliter. The number was no longer surprising to me. By the 11th of the 12 cases, The signature had become predictive. I expected the blood work, before it came back, to fall between 40 and 55 micrograms per deciliter. It always did. His levels normalized over 6 days. His behavior changed permanently. Lucas said when we spoke in 2023 that Coda had become, in the year after Tara's disappearance, a different dog. Not an unhappy dog, not an anxious dog in a general sense, but a dog who would no longer willingly go outside alone, who would not pass through the sliding door at the back of the house without either Lucas or one of Tara's sisters being present, and who slept every night on Tara's side of the bed. Lucas had not been able to bring himself to stop this. Coda slept there still, 5 years later. Lucas had adapted by sleeping closer to his own side. Charles had the key because Dennis had given it to him years earlier in case of an emergency. On a Wednesday morning in October of 2013, at 7 in the morning, Charles used it. He crossed Merrill Pleasance Drive, entered the small row house across the street, and called out his neighbor's name. No one answered. The neighbor was Dennis Verlin, 58, a maintenance mechanic for the Detroit Water and Sewerage Department. His 13-year-old mixed-breed dog, mostly shepherd, named Buster, had been sitting on Dennis's concrete stoop for nearly half an hour when Charles had first noticed him. Buster was old. Dennis had adopted him 10 years earlier from a Detroit rescue after finding him tied to a tree in Piedmont Park with no owner in sight. The dog had walked with Dennis every morning for a decade, through every kind of weather, along the same quarter-mile loop at the edge of the park. That Wednesday morning, Dennis had not come back from the loop. Dennis's walk was short because Buster was old. He took Buster to a small grassy strip at the edge of the park, let him do his business, walked one loop of 100 yards around the strip, and walked home. The entire outing took 15 minutes. Dennis had done the walk every morning of Buster's life with him, regardless of weather. He had health conditions of his own, including diabetes and mild emphysema from a history of smoking, but he never missed the walk. Buster had grown too arthritic for longer walks, and the morning 15 minutes was one of the few joys left in the dog's life. On Wednesday, October 16th, Dennis left the house at 6:10 in the morning. It was still dark. The sky was overcast. The temperature was 49 degrees. Dennis was wearing an old canvas jacket, jeans, and work boots. He was holding Buster's leash in his left hand. He walked around the corner, out of sight of the house, and onto Merrill Pleasance Drive, which ran along the edge of Piedmont Park. He and Buster had been doing this walk for 10 years. At 6:45 in the morning, Buster arrived back at the house alone. A lead still clipped to his collar dragged behind him in the morning damp. Buster scratched at the front door of the row house, whined for perhaps 2 minutes, and then lay down on the concrete stoop. He did not go anywhere. A neighbor named Charles, who lived across the street and who was leaving for his own work shift at a machine shop, noticed Buster on the stoop at 7. He knew Buster. He knew Dennis's routine. He walked across the street. Buster let him approach. Buster did not get up. Charles knocked on Dennis's front door. No answer. Charles tried the door. It was locked. Charles had Dennis's key because Dennis had given it to him years earlier in case of an emergency. He used the key. He went inside. Dennis was not home. Charles called the Detroit police. The Detroit police search of Piedmont Park and the surrounding blocks was limited. Detroit in 2013 was a city with stretched police resources. A missing person report on a 58-year-old man who had gone out with his dog and had not come back received less immediate response than Dennis's situation probably warranted. A patrol unit responded. The grassy strip was walked. Piedmont Park was canvassed. Dennis was not found. The case was entered into the Detroit Police Missing Persons database and assigned a detective who had 73 other open cases. Buster was taken in by Charles. A veterinarian in the neighborhood, who Charles brought Buster to on October 17th, drew a blood panel. The cortisol came back at 41.3 micrograms per deciliter. For a 13-year-old dog, the clinician noted, the elevation was alarming. Buster lived for 10 more months. He died in Charles's home in August of 2014. Buster had spent his last 10 months refusing to approach the grassy strip at the edge of Piedmont Park. Charles had honored the refusal. He had walked Buster to the other direction. Buster had been content. Dennis did not come home. Charles, when I spoke with him in 2023, still lived in the same house across from Dennis's row house. Dennis's row house had been sold by Dennis's sister in 2015 to a landlord who rented it as a duplex. Charles kept a photograph of Dennis in his kitchen, next to the calendar. He said the landlord across the street did not know Dennis had ever existed. He said it was his job, as the remaining witness, to remember for both of them. I want to describe now the few witness observations from across the 12 cases. There are 4. Each of them is incomplete in a different way. The first was Rachel Beal's account of hearing a low-frequency hum, lasting perhaps 3 seconds, at the time of her husband Nathan's disappearance from the end of the Eden Prairie cul-de-sac. Rachel had, at the time, attributed the hum to a truck on the adjacent street. Later, when the Eden Prairie police canvassed the neighborhood for the original dispatch, they found no vehicle movement on the adjacent street that matched the time window. Rachel was not able to describe the sound in more detail. She said only that it had not been a sound she recognized, and that it had ended abruptly. The second was Calvin the fisherman's report from the Emerald Isle Beach, where Joyce Braithweight disappeared. Calvin told the Carteret County deputies that approximately 10 minutes before Coco had walked past him, he had seen what he described as a flash of reflected light on the water north of his position, the kind of flash something metallic might produce, moving through his peripheral vision. He had not turned to look directly at it. When he subsequently considered the observation, he could not identify a source. There were no boats that far in. There were no buoys. There was nothing that would have produced a reflection. Calvin's report was logged, but not pursued, because no corresponding sighting was made by anyone else along the beach. The third was Emily the barista's report from Middlebury. Emily said that immediately before she saw Hershey across the street from the coffee shop, she had smelled a faint ozone smell through the open window of the coffee shop. She had assumed it was an electrical problem with the coffee machines and had checked the machines. The machines had been fine. The ozone smell had not persisted. It had been present for perhaps 30 seconds. She did not mention it to anyone at the time, because it had seemed unimportant. She mentioned it to the Middlebury police sergeant 3 days later, after she had been unable to stop thinking about it. The fourth was Lucas Winters's recollection that on the morning of Tara's disappearance outside Flagstaff, at approximately the time Coda must have been returning from the walk, he had experienced a momentary sense of vertigo while lying in bed asleep. He had woken briefly, felt disoriented, felt his body tilted in a way that did not match his actual physical position, and had gone back to sleep. He had thought nothing of it. Approximately 40 minutes later, Coda had returned alone. Lucas shared that he had not connected the vertigo to his wife's disappearance until several weeks later, when he had been lying in bed at the same time of morning and had felt a faint echo of the same sensation. 4 observations: a low-frequency hum, a flash of reflected light, an ozone smell, a disorienting sense of vertigo, each from a different witness at a different location at a different time of year. None of them matching each other, all of them lasting seconds. None of them accounting for what happened to the 12 owners or what happened to the 12 dogs. I have considered over the past 3 years of working on these cases a structured list of conventional explanations for the pattern, and I want to walk through them one by one, because each deserves to be examined against the physical evidence before being set aside. The first conventional explanation is human predation, a serial offender, or a loose network of offenders, targeting morning dog walkers across the American suburbs. This explanation does not hold for several reasons. The first is geographic. The 12 cases span Colorado, Kentucky, Virginia, Florida, Minnesota, Oregon, Utah, North Carolina, Ohio, Vermont, Arizona, and Michigan. A single offender does not operate across that range without significant travel logistics that would generate a digital and financial trail no law enforcement agency has found. A coordinated network would require communication infrastructure that also would have been identified. The second reason is the dogs. A human offender who attacks a woman walking a 90-pound German Shepherd, as in the Beal case, or a 160-pound Great Dane, as in the Thorp case, does not leave the dog uninjured. Working line shepherds and Great Danes do not passively yield their owners to strangers. They fight. The returning dogs in this investigation had no blood in their fur, no tooth damage, no injuries of any kind. The dogs were not in a fight. Human predators who overcome large working dogs leave evidence. None was present in any of the 12 cases. The third reason, and the most fundamental, is the cortisol signature. A dog that witnesses its owner being attacked by a human offender exhibits cortisol elevation consistent with acute trauma lasting the duration of the attack. That is typically minutes. The cortisol elevation resolves over 24 hours in most cases and over 48 to 72 hours in severe cases. Dr. Hadley's data shows a 7-day resolution curve in 12 out of 12 cases. No animal behaviorist or veterinary endocrinologist she consulted was able to identify a conventional predator and prey or person-on-person violence scenario that would produce the observed hormonal curve in a canine witness. The signature does not fit a crime. The signature fits sustained exposure to an extreme environmental stressor, of a kind that the veterinary literature does not document. The second conventional explanation is voluntary disappearance. The 12 subjects walked away from their lives intentionally. This fails against the victim profile. Miriam Thacker, a long-married physical therapist with no financial or relationship distress. Walter Ashford, a widowed father whose son was in weekly contact. Katherine Tanner, a federal epidemiologist whose husband was at home, awake in bed. Dolores Fenwick, a woman who had structured her entire remaining life around a dog and a small retirement community she had chosen. Nathan Beal, a married father of 2 young sons who had walked his dog that morning as a routine before working from home. Not one of the 12 shows the pre-disappearance profile of a person preparing to vanish. The departures were sudden, physically interrupted mid-activity, and carried no material evidence of planning. And the signature in the dogs, again, does not correspond to a voluntary departure. A dog whose owner walks away from them, even if the owner intended the departure, does not show a sustained 7-day cortisol spike consistent with an acute environmental stressor. Dogs that get lost from their owners show a short elevation and then return to baseline when reunited or when relocated to a stable home. The 12 dogs did not. They exhibited a prolonged response consistent with having witnessed something beyond their experiential range. The third conventional explanation is medical collapse. The subjects had sudden strokes, cardiac events or seizures, lost consciousness, fell somewhere off the walking route, and were subsequently unable to be located. This explanation fails against the search records. Each of the 12 cases involved extensive physical searches of the route and adjacent areas. In several cases, the searches included Canine tracking, drone imaging, and in the Winters case, an Arizona Department of Public Safety helicopter. No bodies have been recovered in any of the 12. The subjects range in age from 29 to 72 and include individuals with excellent cardiovascular fitness. But even setting aside the fitness variable, a medical collapse produces a body that lands within the search radius. None of the searches found a body. Additionally, the cortisol signature in the dogs does not match a sudden medical collapse of a handler. Dogs whose owners collapse in front of them show distress, but their distress pattern, documented in veterinary emergency literature, shows a shorter acute elevation and often does not include the sustained phobic avoidance behavior that characterized every one of the 12 cases. The fourth conventional explanation is coordinated targeting by a law enforcement or intelligence entity. This explanation is occasionally raised in conversations I have with family members, and I think it deserves to be addressed directly. If a federal or state entity were removing individuals from suburban sidewalks in a coordinated program, the operation would require assets, personnel, and logistical footprint that would generate discoverable traces over 11 years across 12 states. No such traces exist. The subjects were not whistleblowers, journalists investigating sensitive matters, individuals with national security clearances, or dissidents. They were, in the specific sense of the word, ordinary. Ordinary Americans walking their dogs. No conventional rationale for targeted state action against any of them has been identified. The fifth conventional explanation is a natural phenomenon producing rapid abduction by a non-human agent, large predator, freak weather event, seismic anomaly. This fails at the simplest level of examination. The 12 cases took place in urban and suburban settings where the population of capable large predators is near zero. Mountain lions do exist in some of the geographies and do occasionally kill humans, but a mountain lion attack leaves a predictable physical signature, including the body, blood, drag marks, and often surveillance of the predator itself. No such evidence was found. Weather and seismic events produce widely distributed effects that are not subject-specific, and that generate records in meteorological and geological monitoring systems, none of which recorded anomalies corresponding to the 12 cases. The sixth conventional explanation is, for want of a better phrasing, an environmental field of unknown character that produces rapid removal of a person with sufficient specificity that only one individual is affected. I include it, not because I endorse it, but because it is the only category of explanation that begins to accommodate the evidence set. It is also the category that conventional science cannot investigate without a known physical mechanism to test. The evidence in the 12 cases is what it is. The signature in the dogs is what it is. The absence of bodies, injuries, witnesses, and offender traces is what it is. Any explanation that accounts for all of the evidence simultaneously falls outside the categories that conventional investigation can address. I want to step back from the evidentiary analysis for a moment and describe something I have observed across the 3 years of speaking with the surviving families. It does not fit cleanly into the forensic structure of this investigation, but it is, in its own way, a form of evidence. The families of the 12 have not been receiving adequate mental health care for what they are carrying. I do not say this as an indictment. I say it because every family I spoke with, without exception, described some version of the same difficulty. There is no public category for grief without a body. There is no cultural script for the kind of bereavement that accompanies an unsolved disappearance, in which no remains have been found, and no explanation has been offered. Hospice counseling presumes a confirmed death. Widow and widower support groups presume knowledge of what happened. Grief therapy operates in the framework of closure. These families do not have closure. They have a mourning 12 years ago or 3 years ago or last week when their spouse walked out with the dog and the dog came back alone, and they have no narrative that can process what happened next, because no narrative exists. Several of the families I interviewed have, over the years, sought professional counseling. The counselors, according to the family's accounts, were sympathetic and well-trained, but did not have tools for this particular shape of absence. One counselor, described to me by Paul Thacker, eventually said aloud in session that she did not know how to help him, and that she was sorry. Paul said he appreciated her honesty more than any of the techniques she had tried. Another family, whom I will not name, lost their marriage in the 2nd year after the disappearance, because neither partner could find a way to hold the other's grief alongside their own, and eventually they stopped trying. A third family has one member who has not left the house more than 2 days per week for the past 4 years. The outside world is too unpredictable. The front door is too porous. The morning hour of the original event is, in that household, observed with something close to ritual silence. I raise this because if you are watching this video and you know someone carrying a loss of this specific kind, the thing that will help them is not being told that their grief will resolve in stages, because the stages assume a resolution. The thing that will help them is being allowed to continue carrying it without a timeline. Show up. Stay in contact. Do not ask when they are going to move on. That question has no answer in the shape of these particular bereavements. The person they are waiting for may or may not ever be confirmed dead. The body may or may not ever be found. The investigating agency may or may not ever reopen the case. In the absence of any of these resolutions, the family lives in a state of suspension that the grief literature has not been written for. What they need is not stages. What they need is company. I consulted, in the process of preparing this investigation, a retired FBI special agent named Henry Oster, who had spent 31 years with the Bureau, including 17 years in the Behavioral Analysis Unit. I sent Oster redacted versions of the 12 case files with the agreement that he would not see subject-identifying information, but would see all evidentiary material, all veterinary records, and all search documentation. I asked for his analysis without sharing my own conclusions. He returned to me, after 10 weeks, with a written statement that I have kept. His statement was 5 pages. He offered no explanation for the pattern. He confirmed that the pattern was, in his professional judgment, real. He stated that the combination of elements he had reviewed, specifically the absence of a body, the absence of offender traces, the physical evidence of interrupted voluntary activity, the behavioral signature in the returning canines, and the cross-case consistency across disparate geographies, did not fit any criminal pattern he had encountered in 3 decades of federal service. He noted that in his experience with the Behavioral Analysis Unit, when a pattern fell outside the recognized categories, the most common outcome was that the investigating agency continued treating the individual cases as local isolated events because the alternative required operating without a framework. He said that his personal belief, offered to me privately and not for publication in the form of agency endorsement, was that the 12 cases belonged to an actual pattern that the federal investigative apparatus would not currently examine because examining it would require acknowledging that the framework did not accommodate it. That statement, from a retired federal investigator of his seniority, is as close as I have come to a conventional institutional acknowledgement of what the 12 cases represent. I want to describe, because I think it is important, the specific ways in which local law enforcement responded to these cases, because the pattern of institutional response is itself part of the story. In 8 of the 12 cases, the local investigating agency conducted an initial search within 48 hours and then transitioned the case to cold case status within 18 months. In 3 of the 12 cases, the FBI joined the investigation temporarily, contributed resources, and withdrew when no criminal pattern could be established. In 1 of the 12 cases, the Tanner case in Arlington, the FBI's Forensic Audio Video and Image Analysis Unit wrote a formal report acknowledging that the disappearance was, in their language, outside the range of conventional kinetic events for objects of the subject's mass, and that report was filed, and no subsequent federal investigation was opened on the basis of it. The report exists. I have a redacted copy. The FBI's internal disposition of the case, as far as I have been able to determine, was to treat the impossibility of conventional explanation as a reason not to pursue the case further, rather than as a reason to open a broader inquiry. This is, as Henry Oster observed in his written statement to me, the structural response of the modern federal investigative apparatus to evidence that falls outside the categories it is prepared to process. The response is not malice. The response is not conspiracy. The response is that the framework requires a category, and when the category is not available, the case is effectively archived. Archived cases do not get cross-referenced. Cross-referencing is how patterns become visible. This is why the pattern across the 12 cases has remained invisible until now. Not because anyone hid it, because the system is not designed to see it. The same structural issue affects the veterinary side. Dr. Hadley's database exists because one veterinarian in one private practice noticed a pattern and took the personal time to document it. The dozens of veterinarians who drew the original blood panels on these dogs did not cross-reference them with each other. They could not have. The veterinary profession has no national registry of stress hormone panels drawn on dogs whose owners went missing. There is no reason such a registry would exist. The pattern that Dr. Hadley has documented emerged because one person happened to see 2 of these cases in close sequence and wondered if there was more. She wrote the first paper. She contacted professional associations. She built the database by hand. Her work is not funded. She does it in addition to her regular practice, on her own time, because she believes the pattern is real and that no other mechanism will surface it. I have come to believe, through this investigation, that this is how the pattern will eventually become visible to institutional science. Not through a federal agency recognizing it, not through the mainstream veterinary literature publishing on it. Through a small number of individual researchers in adjacent fields, quietly collecting data, connecting with each other, and eventually producing a cumulative weight of evidence that exceeds the capacity of the conventional framework to dismiss. Dr. Hadley is one of those individuals. Henry Oster is another, working now from retirement outside the institutional constraints that shaped his earlier career. The families themselves, through their informal network, are a third force. I am, in my modest capacity, trying to be a fourth. What I can say about the pattern, with confidence, after 3 years of examination, is this. The 12 subjects share no demographic profile, no occupational category, no known acquaintance. They share the activity of walking a dog. They share the time of day, between 5:30 and 7 in the morning. They share the geographic setting, residential American neighborhoods of varied typology. They share the physical outcome, absence without recovery. They share the canine signature, extreme and sustained cortisol elevation in the returning dogs, phobic avoidance behavior enduring for the dogs' remaining lives, and in 2 of the 12, early cardiac death. They share the negative evidence, no bodies, no blood, no struggle marks, no offender traces, no witnesses to the event itself, only witnesses to peripheral phenomena that do not corroborate each other. What I cannot say about the pattern is what causes it. I have not resolved that question. I am not going to resolve it in this investigation. I am, in the language I use with my own notes, building the case for the case. I am establishing that there is something that requires explanation. I am documenting that 12 separate investigating agencies across 11 years have been unable to explain individual instances of it. I am documenting that a veterinary researcher has independently identified a physiological signature across the instances. I am documenting that a retired federal investigator of significant seniority has independently confirmed that the pattern is, in his professional judgment, real and anomalous. Beyond that, I am asking the audience to consider what this evidence means, not to draw a conclusion, not to adopt a theory, but to consider that the evidence exists and that it does not fit the framework, and that the framework's inability to accommodate it does not make it less real. I also want to return to Dr. Hadley's work, because the cortisol data is the most under-discussed element of this investigation, and it is, in my view, the single element most likely to drive future progress in understanding the pattern. Dr. Hadley is continuing her research. She has added to her database over the past year. She has reached out to veterinary clinicians across the country through professional associations, asking them to contact her when a blood panel is drawn on a dog whose owner has disappeared on a morning walk. The request has added 6 additional cases to her database since this investigation began, bringing her total to 18 that meet the criteria. The cortisol signatures in the 6 new cases are consistent with the original 12. The phobic avoidance behaviors are consistent. The absence of bodies and offender traces is consistent. Dr. Hadley and I have discussed what the cortisol curve actually describes. What it describes, in physiological terms, is a dog exposed to a stressor of extraordinary intensity, lasting longer than the duration of the walk itself, and causing lasting neural changes that manifest in the subsequent behavior. The walk duration in the 12 cases ranged from 15 to 40 minutes. The stressor duration, inferred from the cortisol curve, corresponds to a stressor acting over hours rather than minutes. Something is, in essence, stretching time for the dog. The dog's body is recording a stressor that cannot fit in the observed window. That is not metaphor. That is the inference the veterinary endocrinology points to. The dog's hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis is responding in the pattern of an animal exposed to something for much longer than the physical walk could have accommodated. No known natural stressor in a suburban morning walk produces that response. There is one more detail from the veterinary analysis that I want to describe. Dr. Hadley, in addition to the cortisol panels, has been collecting what she calls behavioral phenotype summaries from each of the families. These summaries describe in detail how the dog's behavior has changed across the months and years following the event. She has noticed a subpattern within the subpattern. Across the 12 cases, the dogs that previously had strong social behavior with other dogs began, in the weeks following the event, to avoid other dogs as well. Not all other dogs. Specifically, they avoided dogs of the same breed as themselves. A golden retriever that was friendly with other goldens before Miriam's disappearance began crossing the street to avoid other goldens. A German shepherd that had been comfortable with other shepherds began showing avoidance behavior toward them specifically. Dr. Hadley had not found an explanation for this. She had, in her notes, written a single speculative line. The dogs are behaving in the manner of animals that have identified a marker in their own bodies that they now associate with the event, and they are avoiding individuals who carry the same marker. That was her note. She had not shared it with anyone other than me and her research partner. She said she was not ready to publish it because she could not explain it. Dr. Hadley asked me, at the end of our most recent phone call, what I thought the data meant. I told her I did not know. She said she did not either. She said the thing she had come to believe, after 4 years of collecting this data, was that the dogs had experienced something their nervous systems were designed to encode, but that no veterinarian had the vocabulary to name. She said that when she wrote the final paper on this data, which she would write eventually, she would present the endocrinology without proposing a mechanism. She said that was the only responsible approach. She said that she would wait for someone else, someone in a different field, to supply the mechanism. She was not sure who that person was or when the supply would come. I return now to the families. The families of the 12 are in contact with each other through a private network that Paul Thacker helped initiate approximately 4 years ago. They share information. They compare notes. They attend each other's memorials, because in several of the cases the family has eventually held a memorial in the absence of a body. They do not, to my knowledge, speculate collectively about what took their loved ones. They share grief. They share the unique pain of not having closure. They share the strange further pain of knowing that their loved ones' dogs, or their loved ones' dogs' memories, carry information the humans involved cannot retrieve. Paul Thacker said in our last conversation that the group had come to an informal consensus that the dogs were both their comfort and their constant reminder. The dogs' refusals, their scent avoidances, their premature deaths, their sleeping on vacated sides of beds, were simultaneously the clearest surviving evidence that something had happened, and the most painful evidence that the humans could not access what was known. What I am documenting here, in this investigation, will not bring any of the 12 subjects home. It will not restore the years lost to the families. It will not normalize the cortisol in dogs whose bodies still, on the day I am recording this, carry the biochemical memory of an event I cannot explain. What this investigation can do, if I have done it well, is place the pattern into the public record in a form that the investigating agencies cannot easily continue to ignore. The cortisol data is replicable. Dr. Hadley's database is growing. The cross-case consistency is documented. The families are organized. The pattern is not going to disappear because it has been inconvenient for institutions to acknowledge. The pattern is going to continue to produce cases, and those cases are going to continue to produce veterinary records, and the veterinary records are going to continue to accumulate in a way that will eventually exceed the capacity of the current framework to dismiss. If you have ever walked your dog in the morning and felt in the grip of the leash a pull you could not identify, and felt the dog hesitate at a spot for no reason the dog could articulate, the comments below are open. I am not proposing that every morning walk is dangerous. The rate of the events documented here, when measured against the total population of American dog walkers, is infinitesimal. What we are proposing, the families and Dr. Hadley and Henry Oster and I, is that the dogs, in their collective behavior, are telling us something. They are refusing routes. They are alerting. They are remembering places their owners have walked safely for years and now refusing to cross. If your dog is doing this, the dog is not being irrational. The dog is responding to something in the environment that the dog's nervous system has registered, and that your nervous system has not. The dog may be wrong. The dog is more likely registering something real that you cannot perceive. We are not in a position to tell you what to do with that information. We are in a position to tell you that the pattern is real, that the physiology is documented, that the evidence exists in the form of dogs refusing walks they used to love, and chips that fell silent in the shoulders of animals whose owners did not come home. If you know a case that matches what we have described, a dog that returned alone from a morning walk during which its owner did not come home, and that case has not received the forensic attention it deserved, leave a comment or send the details through the channel contact form. Dr. Hadley is interested in expanding her database. The family's network is interested in connecting with additional families. This investigation does not end with the publication of this video. It continues in whatever additional data any of you are able to provide. In the course of speaking with the surviving family members of the 12, I asked each of them, at the end of each conversation, whether there was anything they wanted recorded for future viewers. Not about the pattern, not about theories, just about the persons who had been lost. The responses varied. Paul Thacker said that his wife Miriam had taught him, over 32 years of marriage, that grace toward patients was not something you performed, but something you became. Michael Ashford shared that his father Walter had kept a small notebook of his own mother's recipes and had been, in the year before his disappearance, trying to learn to cook from that notebook in honor of her. Rachel Beal recalled that her husband Nathan had been teaching their older son to code, and that the son had continued to learn on his own and had just completed his first working program. Brenda Fenwick mentioned that her mother Dolores had knitted 17 scarves for the local Salvation Army in the last year of her presence. Emily, the barista in Middlebury, added, through tears, that Robert Callaway had tipped 20% every day and had thanked her by name every day and had been, in her experience, the kindest regular customer she had ever had. We record these details because the 12 have not been allowed to be remembered as individual human beings by the institutional responses to their disappearances. They have been processed as case files. The case files have been closed. Their names have not, in any of the 12, become widely known. None of them were politicians, celebrities, or subjects of sustained national coverage. They were ordinary Americans. The dogs who walked beside them that final morning were ordinary dogs. The walking routes were ordinary walking routes. The mornings were ordinary mornings. And then they were not. If this channel has a central commitment, it is to the ordinary. It is to the people whose absences do not become national stories. It is to the cases that get processed and closed and forgotten by the systems that should have solved them. It is to the families who are left to carry their dead or their lost without the public acknowledgement that would, in some small way, distribute the weight of their grief. The pattern we have described is real. The evidence is real. The people are real. They were walking their dogs in the morning. They were doing the most ordinary thing an American adult does, and they did not come back. Subscribe to this channel. More is coming. There are other patterns the investigating agencies have not noticed. There are other signatures in other types of data. There are other dogs whose bodies are trying to tell us things we have not learned how to hear. I am Echo 7. I read the things dogs will not say. I will see you in the next one.